Um, so the great fear spread throughout France. The nobles and the clergy were afraid. There was a lot of chaos at this time, and people don't really know exactly what's going on. On the night of August 4th in 1789, it's announced that the old regime is dead and no longer are nobles going to have a position of privilege and power. At the same time, the National Assembly declares the rights of man and the citizen. Now, this is a very important document that was written to express what rights people should have in any kind of government. So what they said is that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. All these rights are liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. Everybody should have equal justice, freedom of speech and religion, and they adopt the slogan liberty, equality, and fraternity. So this is going to be kind of a rallying cry for the French Revolution. In addition to that, the state or the government takes over the church, and this is called the Convention on the Clergy. They take over all church lands, and what they do is they take those lands and they actually start distributing them or selling them off to peasants, and they use that money to pay off some of the debts that the monarchy had accrued. Church officials and priests lose their power. They're no longer just kind of selected by the Pope, but they are now going to be elected as if it was a government position. They're actually going to be paid by the government as well. The peasants, they're not educated. They're very afraid of these reforms, and they believe that the Pope should be in charge. And so this is going to cause some mistrust of these revolutionary reforms that are going on. At this time, Louis the XVI is actually getting worried about what's going on in Paris and in France in general, and several of his advisors say that he needs to flee the country or he's probably going to end up dead. So he tries to flee the country, but he's actually caught at the border of the Austrian Netherlands in a place called Verniers, and sent back to Paris kind of in chains. And at this point, the royal family is going to be put under lock and key and house arrest. By 1791, the National Assembly had changed many things. It's no longer an absolute monarchy, but a limited monarchy. The new constitution made a limited constitutional monarchy. It stripped the king of his main authority, and it created a legislative assembly kind of modeled after that of England. And the legislative assembly could create laws, but the king still made the taxes. So there's a bit of a checks and balances system here that Montesquieu promoted during the Enlightenment. The legislative assembly, however, kind of splits apart under this pressure of all the people in France that are struggling. So it splits into three general groups. You have the radicals, the moderates, and the conservatives. So the radicals, they opposed the idea of the monarchy completely. They wanted changes in the way the government was run. Essentially, they wanted a republic or a representative government. So they were looking for a radical change. The moderates, they wanted some changes, but not as many as the radicals. And then the conservatives wanted to keep this limited monarchy with few changes in the government. Also during this time, you had a lot of people that supported the monarch, Louis XVI. A lot of the nobles and some of the clergy actually left France because they were afraid of what might happen to them. They became known as émigrés. And they fled France, and they go to several courts around Europe, especially those in Prussia and Austria, and they actually ask the monarchs for help. They want help in order to stop this revolution from happening. So they wanted to undo this and reinstall the old regime. Then in Paris, you had people called the sans-culottes, which means those without knee breeches. So this is a picture of the sans-culottes on the right-hand side. These are the poor urban workers, and they wanted even greater changes. They wanted more representative government. These are the workers and the small shopkeepers. These are not considered the bourgeoisie. These are poorer than the bourgeoisie. And they didn't have a role in government, and they wanted a role in government. But they were such a large population that through violence or through protests and things like that, they could influence different things on the ground. So like I said before, the émigrés had left France and they asked for assistance from Prussia and from Austria. And so Austria and Prussia actually fight against France. The Parisians go and actually imprison the royal family against these threats. And then they also get violent and start murdering anybody they suspect of supporting the king. So the Parisians are really scared that this revolution might be undone, and so they're going to make sure that it moves forward. The Legislative Assembly starts a new government, which is called the National Convention, and essentially is they're going to declare a republic. They're going to get rid of the absolute monarchy completely, or any kind of monarchy, so the Louis XVI is no longer needed. In the National Convention, these political parties start to develop, and the radicals, who are also known as Jacobins, take control of the National Convention. Marat is the leader, and he calls for the death for all those who support the king. The Jacobins convicted Louis XVI of treason, and that is going to lead to his death by guillotine. So the French are still fighting Austria and Prussia during this time. They actually won a battle at Valmy. England, Holland, and Spain joined the fight against France because everybody's starting to get worried of how out of hand this revolution is getting. So the National Assembly initiates a draft into the army so that it can protect itself from these invading armies. This is when something called the Great Terror happens, or the Reign of Terror. So the Jacobins had many enemies inside of France, and so pretty much a great kind of scare went up. If anybody talked bad about the government, they were probably going to lose their heads. So the peasants were horrified by the execution of Louis XVI. The priests didn't accept the government, and so they started being attacked by the Jacobins. The Jacobins eventually get taken over by a man named Maximilien Robespierre, who takes control, and he goes about wiping out the memory of the past. And this, like I said before, was known as the Reign of Terror. So anybody who's against the revolution is shown to the guillotine. And around 40,000 people are killed during this time. By 1794, the revolution is kind of the Reign of Terror is kind of eaten itself. All right, members of the National Convention are actually scared for their own safety because Robespierre would attack anybody. So they actually ended up killing Robespierre. People were becoming more and more tired of all this death and carnage that was going on. So moderates eventually take up the government. The power shifts back to the hands of the upper middle class, and they create two houses of legislature and a directory that has executive power.